Star Wars 7x7, episode 2058. We know what happens, but you don't know precisely how it will happen. So says Dave Filoni about the Clone Wars Season 7, knowing that the endpoint is Revenge of the Sith. But what's going to happen between now and then? We'll talk about it on today's show. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So here we are, today is the day that the Clone Wars debuts, at least Season 7 Episode 1 debuts on Disney+, and tomorrow we'll be doing a Clone Wars briefing on that episode. You may be listening to this episode and the episode's already out. That's what happens sometimes, you know? But this is what we know so far prior to the release of Clone Wars Season 7. As we've talked about on the show previously, 4-episode story arcs is what we're expecting, and the Bad Batch story arc was in fact a 4-episode story arc previously. We're kicking things off with the Bad Batch. That's the name of the episode, and also just how we're commonly referring to the story arc. So that much is known. The Siege of Mandalore is also known. That's the story where Ahsoka Tano and various other folks are going to Mandalore to take control of it back away from Darth Maul, who is now just Maul because he's no longer a Sith. And that much, again, is known. It's probably going to be the last story arc of Season 7, which means there's a big hole in the middle of this, and we've talked about that from time to time. So I've been looking back at Dave Filoni's comments recently, and also taking a look at footage that has been released so far from Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and I think I have a pretty decent idea of what this middle story arc is going to entail. Now, like I said at the beginning, quoting Dave Filoni, we know what happens, but we don't know precisely how it will happen. So, yeah, take that and take this whole conversation with a grain of salt, as it were. But this primarily hinges on the fact that we see Ahsoka with a speeder bike and going down levels into the Coruscant underworld. So, casting your mind back to Star Wars Celebration Europe in 2016, there was a panel discussion about Ahsoka's Untold tales that featured Dave Filoni, Ashley Eckstein, who does the voice of Ahsoka Tano, and Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story Group. It was moderated by David Collins, and they talked about a lot of the different storylines for the Clone Wars that were never produced. One of them that they discussed was the Siege of Mandalore, so that's where some of the information we know about the show comes from already. There were a couple of others that were discussed in particular that deal with Ahsoka Tano and what happened after she left the Jedi Temple at the end of Season 5, and how she ultimately made her way back to dealing with the Jedi in the case of getting into the Siege of Mandalore. In particular, there were 2 story arcs that were discussed, one of them being referred to colloquially, at least, as Ahsoka's Walkabout, and the other being referred to as a Return to the Jedi, not Return of the Jedi, Return to the Jedi. Get it? Wink! As far as Ahsoka's Walkabout goes, this is a story that's supposed to tell us how Ahsoka basically starts to live in the quote-unquote real world, and she ends up on that infamous sketchy level 1313 in Coruscant's underworld, gets wrapped up in the smuggling operations and crime syndicate stuff, and she is associating with a guy named Nick Sokami who is involved in this, and apparently there is a budding romantic relationship between the two of them at some point. So that at least is what's generally known about that particular storyline, and Ahsoka has to deal with this from a new perspective because on the one hand, she is no longer a Jedi and she can't tell anyone that she used to be a Jedi, and she can't do things that are Jedi-like, if you will. However, she still has this very strong moral center that was, part of her Jedi training and her upbringing, and it hasn't gone away, so she has to figure out how to make her way in this world, not as a Jedi, but as somebody who still has something very similar to the ideals of a Jedi in place. And so ultimately she becomes sort of a mysterious vigilante operating in the underworld. And moving into the next story arc, the Return to the Jedi, Ahsoka comes up from the underworld to alert the Jedi that some sort of scheming is happening in the lower levels of the underworld that may threaten Yoda's life, to say nothing of the Jedi Order, the Republic, etc., etc. And they end up going all the way down to level 1, like all the way down to the bottom depths of the underworld, which may or may not even be habitable to begin with. And this is when they find out that the Jedi Temple is actually built above the ruins of an ancient Sith temple. And this is a thing that we see again and again. Dave Filoni has said this stuff has real-world parallels as well, but just recently we saw it in The Disappeared, that two-part episode in Season 6, or that two-part story arc, I should say, in Season 6 of The Clone Wars that featured Jar Jar Binks and Mace Windu. So, yeah, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff that happens with that story arc too, which, if I'm right, and this is going to be a part of what we're going to see, then I just might stop there, though you can watch the entirety of the Ahsoka's Untold Tales panel from Star Wars Celebration Europe. That's the one that took place in London in July of 2016. That is on YouTube for you to check out, so if you want the whole shebang and to see whether this is going to be a part of Clone Wars Season 7, then do check that out. The fact that we see Ahsoka in what looks like that cavern going down into the underworld, that strongly suggests to me that we are going to spend some time with her down there. But because of the fact that this is two story arcs that we're talking about here, and we only have enough episodes for one, unless, they do some sort of, juggling around with things, I feel like they're either going to combine those two, or maybe we're only going to get one of them. But now, the other thing to throw into this whole business is, what has Dave Filoni himself said that might give us any indication that I'm on the right track about this? Well, I'm going to share that with you after the break. Stay tuned. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7X7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7X7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7X7. Welcome back. So, Dave Filoni did an interview with Entertainment Weekly, I love the naming of Entertainment Weekly now that it's a monthly magazine, but I'll leave that here for the moment. Here's what Dave Filoni has said about the Clone Wars, and particularly about the pillars of storytelling in Star Wars and Ahsoka in specific. First, he said, "I tried to do things that honored what we had been doing on this series when I was working with George. At the same time, I knew this had to have a sense of completion." And then the narrative of the article goes on to talk about the pillars of Star Wars storytelling, the conflict between selflessness and selfishness, greed and fear. And about that, Filoni says this: "It's really the backbone of the Star Wars saga. It's that personal journey. We saw that with Luke Skywalker, and we've seen Rey going on this journey. But for me now with Ahsoka, she's been the student Jedi the whole time, and she's finally being challenged by what she will do with her knowledge and her training and her abilities when faced with the ultimate test, which is what you'll see at the end of Clone Wars here." And to my thinking at least, it makes perfect sense that Ahsoka Tano would be a prime focus of these final episodes of the Clone Wars. I mean, most of the characters in the Clone Wars, the, headline characters, if you will, are all movie characters, right? Anakin and Padme and Obi-Wan and Yoda and Mace Windu and so on and so forth. But Ahsoka Tano is really sort of the headline new character introduced to us in the Clone Wars, developed an incredibly passionate fan following, and is probably one of the big reasons why this season is even happening. People wanting to see not just the Clone Wars finished, but her story finished. At least her story within this particular period of time. And, in thinking about the clones themselves, I could be wrong about this, but I think Cody is the only clone who is mentioned by name in the movies, right? Whether it's Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. I don't think Rex is at all, and so it would make sense that Rex would also be a particular focus of these episodes too. All right, that's gonna do it. Next time, let's talk about Season 7, Episode 1. But for now, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you so much for joining me, as always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the galaxy you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.